We're talking about women being, majority of women are the ones who are the abused in domestic violence, but there are also other parties who suffer in domestic violence, and these are children, and if they're children in the relationship or in the marriage. And the Children's Act is to protect the rights of the child. And one of the things that I know is a bit of a contention for women, or has an adverse effect on women, is when the fathers are given, in this case where it is the father who is the abuser, where the father is given the right to see the child and then uses the child as a pawn to further torment the mother, and even if they're not living in the same house anymore, but he still has access to torment the mother through the child. And Mavis, you were talking about some research that's been going on.
Well, there's another development currently underway, which is the interest of fathers in increasing the amount of time they spend with their children after a separation, which sounds lovely. I mean, of course, everyone wants children to have a good relationship with both their parents. But when we're looking at the cases which come to the courts, it's a very, very tiny minority of separating parents who can't sort out how they're going to look after their children after divorce. It's less than 10%. So stands to reason that they're not Mr. and Mrs. Average. They are pretty conflicted, very angry, very distressed, possibly mental health issues, addiction. And we think between a third and a half of cases that there are domestic violence issues rumbling along in the background. Well, at the moment, the court makes its decision about contact purely in terms of the best interests of this child at this time. The child isn't a piece of property you give to one parent or the other. You look at what's best for this child at this moment. But there are concerns from fathers' groups, some of whom are absolutely wonderful, some of whom are as mad as hatters, has to be said. There's one group who blog about me, and they call me Mad Mavis, and they talk about my fanatical feminist Taliban, which are all warmly invited to join. I have some quite surprising members amongst senior judiciary. But there is this movement to... That's
disturbing on another level, but please continue.
I don't know going to blow up. But, there is this movement to change the Children's Act just a little bit to make it more likely that men will have more time with their children. And the fear is that this was done in Australia very carefully, very gently, but it resulted in men misunderstanding the law and thinking, right, I've got the right to half my child's time. And if you think about the kinds of people who are going to be involved with the courts, the men coming along demanding that 50%, at a time when the legal aid for the women has disappeared, and they're not going to have any help in putting forward the arguments why they don't think this is a good idea. I think we're in for a pretty rough time for some women, and particularly the women who are currently victims of domestic violence. And this is what Maypole is trying to help with.
I think it's really important to remember that in domestic violence situations, children are often either indirect, as in they witness the violence, or direct victims, which is they're either assaulted themselves or they're assaulted in the course of defending their mother. So it's very important that we get it right where children are concerned. And the last bit of research I remember is that in just under 90% of cases, children are where domestic violence is reported, children are either in the same room or in the next room. So to think that they're not aware of the violence it's not tenable. They are very much aware of the violence. And I'm often intrigued by the men's groups who are concerned about the mad feminist cabal that's trying to ruin the country. It's not about trying to separate families. It's about trying to deal appropriately with those situations where violence is an issue. That's it. We're not a bunch of mad feminists trying to destroy families. Where a family, where there is a history of domestic violence, where there is ongoing violence, the state has a duty, actually, a human rights duty, to take action. Something has to be done. And where the violence has been reported against a mother, against children, action has to be taken. But not knee-jerk reactions like in some instances you hear of social services saying to the woman, well, if you don't leave this relationship, we're going to take your children away. That's further victimization. And what we're concerned about is men who have been using coercive and controlling behaviour being able to use the court proceedings to carry on that pattern of power and control.
And this is where the Children's Act, where it says that in the best interest of the child, he has to be or she has to be in contact with the father, but not realizing, and it's what you just said before, that the after effects or the continuing effects on women, it would be that, yes, it's great for the child to have contact with their father, but if that contact is going to be further abuse on the woman, then that hasn't really been taken into...
Well, further abuse on the woman, further abuse on the child themselves, because there is bound to be a psychological reaction from the child about the violence that they're witnessing or being exposed to on a regular basis. So the Children's Act or the Children and Adoption Act did recognise in their definition of harm the harm that's caused by witnessing domestic violence. So that's very good, and that's a good step. But we have to be careful not to step back from that in terms of saying, well, actually the starting position should be 50-50. And that's the issue with mediation and domestic violence. It assumes that both parties are equal. But in domestic violence, both parties are not equal. You cannot have mediation between people who are not equal. It doesn't work. That isn't mediation. And so care has to be taken about this blanket assumption that 50-50 parenting is the right way to go.
What were you going to say?
I think as well with the legal aid changes, if we are going into an environment where generally the mothers aren't going to have the legal representation and they are on their own, it's much easier if they have representation, because we're the ones doing the talking and we're the ones that can put their case forward, and we protect them to a certain extent. If that legal aid in terms of those that are eligible is taken away because there isn't an instant amount of domestic violence, or it's not currently occurring in a capacity that is possible to be verbalized in this environment, then they don't have the representation they need. Not only does it further marginalize them, but it takes an immense amount of courage for them to stand up and say to a judge when they have their ex-partner or the perpetrator of the domestic violence within quite possibly 2 meters of them, to say, I don't want him to have contact because he did this. And there's a lot to be said that the courts will take every step possible to protect the children. And remember last time that I was here when we were talking more in terms of a separation arrangement, the courts do have welfare officers known as CAFCAS who will undertake an assessment with the children, who will go and speak to the children depending very much on their age and find out their wishes and feelings. What do you want in this environment? But we have to remember that if there's no one there to put their voice forward, if these changes do come out, not only does the mother have to admit to what's going on in a public environment with the perpetrator there, the children also have to have the opportunity to say, and the courage, and these can be, if they're being spoken to really by CAFCAS, then we're talking generally about age 10 upwards. If they're younger than 10, then it's generally through drawings and less direct approach of finding out their wishes and feelings. But this child has to also have the courage to say, well, I don't really want to have that because I've seen this or because I've been a victim of this. If you have the representation there, then we are the voice. We can let the CAFCAS officer know that through their evidence, through a statement, for example, in support of why we don't want this shared residence or shared contact arrangement. Without that, and without the guidance from professionals who are able to be the voice, these generally women, and of course, I do think it needs to be said that it's not always the men that are the perpetrators. Yeah. It can work the other way, and there has been a recent case where the woman has been convicted of assault in a criminal capacity. But if they don't have someone directing them to say, this is what you need to say, and we can say it for you, it's immensely concerning if these are the proposals, because while CAFCAS are involved and they are there to protect the children and so that the court can make a decision, what is in the best interests of the child, what's in, putting their welfare first, if this isn't spoken about, to a certain degree, the court can't take those protective measures because the court doesn't know about it.
Yeah.
There's one more additional element to this, which is the Children Act is always looking to the future. What's going to be best for these children as they go on through their lives. And it's led to some real difficulties. A colleague of mine, Liz Trinder from Exeter, has done some work. She's tape recorded these interviews between parents and CAFCAS officers, and you'll hear the CAFCAS officer saying to mum, what's the problem? Why don't you want the children to go to dad for the weekend? And mum will start explaining why by referring to things that have happened in the past. And the CAFCAS officer will say, no, we don't want to look back, we want to look forward. And there's one interview which I always remember where mum is saying, I don't want the children to go for the weekend because his new partner is HIV positive and there was blood in the bath time I was there. And if you think of that in a child protection setting, everyone would be
up in arms,
critical of this woman for not protecting her children. But in this setting, the CAFCAS officer said, no, come along. We're looking to the future. We don't want to go over things in the past. It's very, very hard for mum to explain, especially that was quite a clear-cut example. But if she's got anxieties about sort of inappropriate way dad dances with a 12-year-old after he comes home from the pub, or they come home looking a bit undernourished and overtired, and all of these past experiences are hard to relate to future anxieties in that setting.
I think that's as well one of the issues that is really going to be highlighted, because if they had the availability of legal representation very frequently in cases like this where there is domestic violence, the children's side of things is attached to the first application for the injunction, for the protective orders in the first place. And very often the court will put them together. So the hearing on whether or not the incidences did take place and the evidence given to the court will stand in what was referred to as a fact-finding hearing. Did these incidents happen? And it's worth just pointing out to listeners that civil courts and family courts don't have the same burden as proof as the criminal courts. Whereas the criminal courts are beyond reasonable doubt. Did this actually happen? Family, it's far lower. Is it more likely than not that this took place? So it's already a lower threshold to get over. And if the court finds that there has been this domestic violence and there has been this history of it, the findings are made. Those findings are then given to the CAFCAS officer, who does then have the benefit of the previous history. And if the court has made these findings, the CAFCAS officer can't ignore it. They have to be able to say, OK, well, in light of this, what do we do for the future? And this is where referrals and recommendations for DVIP come on board, for the Domestic Violence Intervention Project. If we don't have that assistance at the very beginning because they're changing this definition, then we do have problems where the CAFCAS officer doesn't have an appreciation for the gravity of what has happened. It's all very well to say, let's look to the future. But if those women who are being further marginalised don't have a voice to express how grave the past has been, it puts them in a position where we can't appreciate what needs to be done for the future.
What I'm getting from all this, because coming new to the issue of domestic violence, is that women will be marginalised because of domestic violence. So all these other laws that are going on regarding children in divorce and separation and issues like that, it's all well and good. But once domestic violence comes into the equation, it seems that women are further marginalized, and you know, it's almost as if they're a victim all over again, just because there are victims of domestic violence. Am I reading this wrong?
Well, the United Nations says that gender violence is a cause and consequence of gender inequality. It happens because of inequality, and it further perpetrates inequality because women are more likely to be working in lower paid jobs. There's vertical and horizontal segregation in jobs. They're more likely to be working in lower paid jobs, working part-time. If you factor in domestic violence with financial control, where they don't have control of their own money, where they're limited in how much money they have, or if they're precluded from working at all, then immediately they're in a difficult position. How do you leave if you cannot take care of your children? Most women are not going to leave their children. I say most women because there may be some women who, for other reasons, may feel that that's the only option they have. But most women will want to take their children with them. If you have no finances or you have insufficient finances, how do you leave? And if you think about going to the state to get assistance and you have to prove to them that you're a victim of violence, that's why your income is as it is, that's why you haven't worked, that's why you haven't got this or that, and they say to you, well, yes, you can go and we'll give you, I don't know, £50 or £100 a week, and you're thinking for you and 3 children, it's not going to work. And often there's a sense of guilt. If it's a more affluent family, there's a sense of guilt, I think, on the part of the woman that I'm taking my children away from this to give them what? I don't want them to lose all the things that they have. Maybe, for example, they go to private school and she's not able to pay for that if she leaves. And so she may be more likely to remain in an abusive relationship for the sake of the children. Other women will leave because of the children. So it's not clear-cut at all. But it is a cause and a consequence. Gender inequality is a cause and a consequence of, violence against women is a cause and a consequence of gender inequality, which is very much a human rights issue.